Welcome to Righteous Pursuits. My name is Charissa, and thanks for tuning in once again. By the title of this video, you already know what I am about to discuss. And it basically has to do with your time of reign. When you reign, it's important to stay obedient to the voice of God. So in my studies, I was focusing a lot on the story of David and Saul, and something stood out to me. I would encourage you to read 1 Samuel chapter 15 and also chapter 16, but in this I'm going to focus more on chapter 15, and we see in 1 Samuel chapter 15 that the Lord had instructed Samuel, the prophet Samuel, to anoint Saul as king over Israel. And he was obedient to the voice of the Lord. And so what the Lord had done was that he instructed Saul to kill all the Amalekites. Everything they had to be destroyed, from their flock, the men, the women, the infants. All of them were to be killed. And that was the instructions that the Lord had given Saul, King Saul. So when this happened, he went to the city to destroy the Amalekites. But when he went, he still disobeyed God. He still had decided to spare the king of the Amalekites. And he still decided to spare the Amalekites' sheep and oxen, when clearly the Lord God had instructed him to kill everything that they owned, basically. So when the Lord saw this, basically, he was so displeased with Saul, and he spoke to the prophet Samuel and told the prophet Samuel basically how much he was displeased with what he had done. He was displeased because the King Saul didn't follow his instructions or his commandments. And when Samuel heard this and heard how the Lord felt about it, basically he felt sad about it. So what he did, he went to speak with Saul to tell him about what God had spoken to him. And when basically the prophet Samuel told him what God had said to him, Saul was like wondering, okay, why is the Lord God displeased with me? So when the prophet Samuel went to speak with Saul, he asked Saul, why did he disobey the voice of God? And he told him how obedience is better than sacrifice. He said rebellion is like witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. So this goes to show you, like, you may be saying, oh, I'm sacrificing this unto God. I'm doing this sacrifice. I am doing this and that. I'm sacrificing unto God, but you're not obeying what God is telling you to do. It displeases him. To God, being obedient to what he has instructed us to do is what makes him pleased with us. So you could say you sacrificing this and sacrifice that, but the thing that is most important to God is that we are honoring him with being righteous and obedient unto him. And so after the prophet Samuel told Saul exactly how the Lord felt about his disobedience, Saul then admits that he was afraid of the people and obeyed their voice instead of listening to the voice of the Lord. So basically because the people wanted these flocks and wanted these things, basically, or sheep, basically, he decided that he would ignore the voice of God and decided to listen to the voice of the people. And when it's time for you to reign in your season, it's important to listen to the voice of the Lord. It's important not to do what other people want you to do, but to do what you know God has called you to do. When God tells you to do something, you must follow his lead. Follow the instructions he has given you. Okay? You cannot listen and let the voices of other people be louder than the voice of God. Whatever ministry God has called you in, whatever position God has called you in, it is because of Him. So why do we let the outside voices reign louder than the voice of God, who has given us the positions and who has put us in certain situations, who has put us in high places? Why listen to other people if it is God who causes us to triumph and to reign in victory? Why? So basically, Saul decides to listen to the voice of the people. The people's opinions basically mattered than the opinions of the Almighty God. And in this season, listen carefully, in this season, we all, not even y'all, all of us, we can't let people's voices be louder than God, because there are people who will be there, who will come and they will love you one day and be against you the next day. You need to listen. We all need to listen to God, because He is a God basically who never changes. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the thing about it is that people will let you down. People will disappoint you. You know, people let you down. People change. 1 minute, someone may be mad at you for something you don't even know as small as something is. And the next day, they are your friends. Like, people change their mind all the time. And that can be frustrating. That's why it's so important to make sure that the Lord is your number one friend. You know, you have to put Him first before anybody else, before family, before friendships. You have to put before children. You have to put Him first before everybody. People are not perfect. All of us are not perfect. And so you have to be cautious about that. We know that God is a man that He should not lie. When He says something, He will do it. And also, when God puts you in a specific position, you must follow His plans and not your own. You know, He knows why He tells us to do specific things. In the story, He understands and He knows why He told King Saul why he wanted Saul to destroy him. And by his disobedience, you know, God put him in place. God put him in that position as king to fulfill the duties He needed him to fulfill as king. You know? And so we have to try to do whatever it is and try to be consistent and be open to the voice of God, knowing what He wants us to do and knowing what He doesn't want us to do. And it's a time where people have to stop trying to be liked by other people. Stop trying to be accepted by other people. Some people are just frenzied. They need people around them in order to do things in their life. They don't push themselves unless they have someone there to push them. And the thing is, in life, we will always be in situations where we need to encourage ourselves in God. And so you can't expect your mom to be there for the rest of your life, or your dad, or your grandmother, or your father to push you every time. You have to push yourself. You have to say to yourself, hey, regardless of what I'm dealing with right now, I'm going to push myself and I'm going to believe in myself, even though things don't seem to be lining up the way I want them to line up. So you have to push yourself. You can't rely on people. You have to rely on God to give you the strength. Okay? So stop relying on people to try to stop trying to do things to make people like you all the time. The only person you should be trying to please is God. And so God was displeased with him because of his disobedience. And Samuel basically told Saul, you know, he gave him a backstory. Basically, you were the head of your tribe when you were little, and the Lord anointed you as king. And now God instructed you to destroy the sinners the Amalekites and kill them all. So why did you disobey God? God is the one who called him. He called King Saul from a child. He anointed him from when he was a child. He raised him up. And this is what King Saul did. He disobeyed God. And a lot of times people prefer, they get off, or it makes them feel good when people praise them all the time. When people praise you, don't take that in. Okay? Don't take that in. And you always give God the praise, glory, and honor when people try to praise you. Because it is not by our will, but it's by the Spirit of God. It is by Jesus who gives us the strength to execute and to be a success. And to be a success, it is not by our own strength. Don't be like how King Saul was. Don't be like how King Saul was. Remember how far God has brought you from. And many of us have been in a lot of different situations. Situations where people have put us to the side. People have rejected us. People thought the worst of us. And God just came in, and he was the one who believed in us. He was the one who had faith in us when everyone turned their back. You understand? So when God brings you into this season, and for many people, their time to reign is now. And when you start to reign and really be in the position God has designed for you to be in, during your reigning season, you have to remember how far you've come. And I like journals. I would recommend all of you to write journals. Write journals about things that it's good to have a journal, because when you look back at how far you came, and you see all the things that God has done and how much you've grown and in your mind and stuff like that, you start to see how far God has brought you from and how much he was present in your life. So I would encourage you, get a journal, write in it. A journal is good to vent, different feelings. Write about how you felt in certain situations and how, in every moment, just write it out. It is really, really, really good to journal your feelings, and it helps. But mainly I brought that up it's because journals are really good, because when you see the things that you have gone through and the things that you have been tested in, you would appreciate even more of the things that God had took you out of. When you look back, you'll be like, wow, I actually been through that. Oh, I remember this. Some things you probably forgot, but when you read it, you're like, wow, I remember when this happened, and I remember how I felt in this moment. So it's important to look back at how far God has brought you from. So basically, the prophet Samuel told Saul, basically God has rejected you as king and chosen another king. And we know from the last video I did, we know that the king was King David. God had called King David to be king. God chose someone. This is what the prophet Samuel said. Basically, God chose someone who would not be double-minded, or a person who would change his mind. And so King Saul, who was no longer king, he was someone who changed his mind very easily. And I think God allowed David to be the next king in line, because he felt like King David wouldn't be a person who would try to bend and break for people. He would let his yes be yes, and his no be no. And that's why they say that, that's why it says that David was a man after God's heart, because David did whatever he could to please God. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't a perfect man, but his desire was always to please God in everything that he did. And even though he may have slipped up or made mistakes, he still had a humble spirit and was able to let God know, I'm sorry, everything was just about God. And so basically with this, we have to always remember that when God raises us up, that we would follow his commands. Let's try not to be disobedient, and let's try to always do whatever we can to please him. But this is all I wanted to discuss. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.